Hi, my name is Evan Shapiro. I'll be your host for Streaming Media Connect this August week, this hot August week across the country. A few housekeeping elements before we jump into our first great panel. We're giving away an Amazon gift card every single session, but you have to be here. You have to be in it to win it. In order to win, you have to be the first person who posts in the chat the correct song or title of music that was just playing during the opening credits there. If you're the first person to do that and you're here at the end of the panel, you will win a $50 Amazon gift card.
We need the title and the artist. I'm sorry.
Sorry, the title and the artist. Thank you very much. We need both the title and the artist. And I see guesses in there already. If you think they're right, well, then it's already in there. But if it's not, go ahead and put your guess in. We'll explain that at the end. Put chat in the chat. Save your questions till the end of the session. Make sure that you write them down so that you remember them. If you post them in the chat, that kind of clogs up the chat, but we will answer all your questions at the end. I want to thank our sponsor, vNova, for sponsoring this great panel. And we are here for a real world look at deploying a new codec. Sponsored by vNova and hosted and moderated by the one and only Jan Ozer, from Streaming Learning Center. Jan, take it away.
Thanks, Evan. Welcome, everyone. And make sure I'm working here. So H.264 came to market in 2004, but according to Rethink TV, still comprises about 72% of all streams on the internet. It enjoys, as one LinkedIn commentator stated, the stickiness of the launch codec. Now, this is despite the obvious technical superiority of VP9, HEVC, AV1, VVC, LC-EVC, and even EVC. So why do we love to talk about new codecs, yet deploy them so slowly? Well, that's what we're here to find out. We've got a great panel with 3 prominent publishers and 1 super connected analyst. The publishers will detail the factors they consider when deploying a new codec, the true savings advanced codecs deliver, and the true costs of deploying. The analyst will detail what he learned from speaking with dozens of publishers and manufacturers of mobile devices, smart TVs, and OTT dongles. So let me briefly introduce the speakers. We've got Alex Sambella, who's Technical Product Manager at Warner Brothers Discovery, Behnam Kakavand, who's Video R&D Lead Engineer at Evolution Gaming, Alex Davies, Editor and Senior Analyst at Rethink TV and Wireless and Rethink Technology Research, and Alex Gelati, who's a Fellow of Advanced Technologies at Comcast. And I'm Jan Ozer from NetInt and Streaming Media Magazine. So let's jump in. Publishers, what's the most recent codec that you deployed, and what factors did you consider when deciding to deploy? And let me start with Alex Gelati here. Alex, if you want to get the screen, let me know if you can't share it, but I think you should be able to. And get your camera up and get your microphone up.
Okay. So unsurprisingly, the most recent codec that we deployed was HEVC, and there are actually two things that we can talk about here. The first one was a greenfield deployment. It's kind of no-brainer. So you have 100% device support. You don't have legacy, and it's a better codec. Now the harder thing is when you have a large population of old devices, so devices that are AVC only. So in this case, okay, UHD, you can always do HEVC just because you don't have any other choice. For HD, so we have something like 60% of HEVC capable devices, but this leaves us still with millions of set-top boxes that can only do AVC. If you go and do something that is mixed, you have double the infrastructure. You need somehow to do an insertion in both AVC and HEVC. and things like this. So you are probably, in the best case, want to go and do initially a part of the channels in HEVC and everything in ABC. So just as a side story, you were asking about the new codecs. Let me tell you about the codec that is just out. So relatively recently, we got rid of MPEG-2 HD. So it sounds like technology from my college days, but we had a population of set-top boxes that didn't support AVC but supported HD, and what was actually needed to go and stop transmitting them to everyone, because it's old-style cable distribution, was actually physically replacing these boxes. So this is the stickiness that Jen was talking about.
Okay. What is the bandwidth savings you're seeing from HEVC as compared to H.264?
It depends. So for HD, you can easily get to 2 megabits. In our case, in some cases, we selected higher bandwidth initially to go and maintain pristine quality, and then tools like Content Adaptive help us a lot, so that we don't need will help us a lot, so that we don't need to go and lower the peak rates. Okay.
And what about, were you involved with the decision to decide to populate with HEVC set-top boxes as compared to H.264, or was that made in a different department?
Even easier. This was a part of the SOC. So the SOC had support for HEVC from the beginning. You're actually hard pressed to find SOCs that don't by now.
Okay. Okay, Behnam, what was the latest codec that you adopted, and tell us about how that decision process was made?
Sure. Thank you, John. Thank you for having me here. Well, the thing is that for us, the process of basically deploying a new codec starts with deploying a new infrastructure. For so many other publishers like us who are doing low latency live streaming, basically, we, other than the legacy codec, if you can call it, almost 20 years old codec of AVC, many are already using infrastructure based on the legacy technologies, something like the RTMP and FLV. So that imposes a codec lock. I mean, basically, you cannot use anything else if you're relying on something like RTMP. For us, the process of deploying new codec started with that. We are upgrading our, as we're speaking, we're upgrading our infrastructure, and we are evaluating, not fully deploying the codec right now. The HEVC and AV1 are main candidates, and we've done extensive testing of both of them. And as for the criteria, I mean, the things that we are basically considering in choosing the new codec is, first of all, what you, Jan, said in one of your articles, the playability is the most important ability of a codec. So that's, we would like to reach as many, I mean, as wide as audience as possible. So in that sense, HEVC seemed like a logical choice in next step. Although at the beginning, HEVC was basically, there was so many misunderstanding, if you like, regarding the licensing, and left a bad taste in publishers and content creators. Basically, it left a bad impression with us. So we thought that we should go for something else that doesn't have those issues. But we are hearing that that might not be the case with the AV1. There might be licensing troubles with that. We hope not. But yeah, another big factor in our decision was the bitrate savings. When comparing the HEVC and AV1, it looked like that the AV1 is the winner in that sense, that it could give us more bitrate saving. And in our tests, depending on the content, depending on the conditions, and our very, very strict requirement of latency, we see something between 10 to 20, 22, 3% of saving on the AV1. And yeah, another big factor in our decision making regarding a new codec is the power, basically, consumption. amount of money that we have to spend on energy. Since our encoders are working 24/7 all year round, and that's a big thing. If a newer codec is spending too much, I mean, we have to spend too much money on our energy bills to make those savings. That may not, at the end of the day, be as big of a saving as we would like to achieve. So for now, looks like that the AV1 and HEVC are the biggest candidate. Regarding the VVC or others, I am not sure yet. Although the LCVC is not out of picture, since it is technically it should be applicable in any codec. It's an enhancement layer rather than a full codec. So that we may give it a try in future on that, maybe the LCVC as well.
Okay, so defining your market as, you know, we heard from Alex Gelati that he's looking at a lot of set-top boxes and some other devices, and he's obviously doing a mix of live and VOD, or I assume it's live and VOD. It could be mostly live. You're doing, I guess, almost exclusively live. And who's your basic target player? I mean, who do you care about on a deployability perspective?
Sure. Yes, we are exclusively doing live in low latency, not ultra low latency, but low latency. And our biggest markets are the mobile users. So from what we are hearing that, for example, the Android's supposed to go AV1 native in 2024 from the Alex's report. And so it paints a clear picture for us, I mean, roadmap. But to give you a basic answer, yes, the mobile devices and mobile users are both iOS and Androids are our main target users.
Okay. Alex Sambella, what do you got for us?
Hi, Jen. So the latest codec that we deployed at Warner Brothers Discovery was HEVC for the Max platform. So we launched Max in the US back in May. And when we launched, we deployed it with H.264 and with HEVC support. And in the case of HEVC, we decided to use HEVC for both HDR and SDR content at all resolutions. And so we didn't do that, thing that, is often done with new codecs where you sort of only reserve it for your premium content. We really just went all in on HEVC. And so we deployed HEVC main 10 profile specifically for SDR. And so all content on Max, for example, today is available in HEVC main 10, whether it's HDR or SDR. So typically when we deploy any new codec, the first thing to look at is player compatibility, device reach, device penetration, and that can be very specific to the service, right? So it's not necessarily relevant, what the situation is just in browsers or just in mobile devices, right? We have to look at the whole device ecosystem that's on our platform. And so we have to look at, every single device that has a Max app or is, compatible with Max app, what the device reach would be with those. And with HEVC today, I mean, I would say we've reached critical mass as far as device adoption goes. I think we're at this point well past 70%, 75% of devices out there supporting HEVC, and not just any HEVC, but HEVC main 10 with DRM support. And so that's, DRM support is the other thing that I think somebody else mentioned on this call. When it comes to premium content, there's no streaming service really today that can deploy that can distribute premium content without the DRM. And so DRM really becomes a hard requirement for any new codec that we want to support. So the other challenge with deploying a new codec such as HEVC is understanding also which devices support it. And so even when we say, okay, 75% of devices do support it, we have to somehow pick the ones that are compatible. And so for that, we can take either a client side or server side approach where we can rely on client side logic to basically have the players be smart enough to detect what they support, what they don't support. You can send them a full dash or HLS manifest with all the codecs and let them pick the ones they support. or you can take a more server-side approach and filter them down, basically filter down the manifest just to the compatible codecs and kind of take the guesswork out of the playback session. And so those are sort of the I would say the biggest the most important criteria that we consider when we're deploying a codec.
What are the bandwidth savings you're seeing with HEVC over H.264?
So it ranges depending on resolution. So when you're looking at HD resolutions and 4K resolutions, it's easy sometimes to see savings, between 25 and 40% with HEVC over AVC. And so some of those, promises, right, of bitrate savings that, we expected from HEVC do come true at the higher resolutions. But then as you go down in resolution and, you still have to support a full encoding ladder. And so often, you find yourself encoding, 320 by 180 video. The bitrate savings are not as huge, right? And so I would say across the board, the bitrate savings end up averaging out probably closer to 15 or 20% over AVC.
Okay. What about the cost side? I mean, let's discuss two costs. One is encoding both formats, and the other is the caching efficiency. So why don't you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a higher compute cost for HEVC, though I think the encoders have gotten a lot better over the last several years, and also, most cloud computing platforms have also improved in terms of their CPU offerings, and so we have, highly multi-threaded CPUs available in the cloud. Most encoding these days is parallelized as well, right? So if you're building a video transcoding platform that needs to handle a very high volume of content, you're going to parallelize it so that you're not necessarily encoding one video on one machine. You're going to spread it out across multiple machines, and so when we do it that way, the compute cost increase from HEVC, it's certainly there, but it's not so significant that it would prevent us from doing HEVC. And so we're definitely reaching a point where I think HEVC encoding is going to become cheap enough that it'll almost seem like a free add-on on top of the AVC encoding. And sorry, your other question was about the fragmentation of caching.
Yeah, what's that look like for you?
I mean, I haven't seen much of an impact from that because all of our devices support AVC, and so obviously that's going to be highly cached. I mentioned that over 75% of the devices support HEVC, and so we're getting a lot of caching efficiency for HEVC as well. So yeah, I would say we haven't seen any negative impact of quality of experience due to caching fragmentation.
What about cost? Aren't you paying for 2x the caching, or are you reducing the?
Yeah, I mean the cost is it's interesting. I feel like a lot of times it's assumed that there's a direct one-to-one mapping between CDN cost savings and the bitrate savings from the more advanced codecs. And what I've found is that that's simply not the case, because if everybody in the world had unlimited bandwidth, if we all had unlimited, connection speeds, then that would perhaps be true. But in reality, right, if you reduce the bitrate, for example, of your 1080p encode from 6 megabits in AVC down to, let's say, 4.5 megabits in HEVC, somebody who's in a 3 megabit connection is still going to get 3 megabit video, right? So you're not necessarily reducing the amount of data you're delivering to those people. And as it turns out, there's still a lot of population, not just in the US, but certainly around the world, right, that has, connection speeds that are below 4 or 5 megabits a second. And so the CDN savings end up being probably closer to 5 or 10% if you're saving 20% on bitrate overall. So it's definitely not a one-to-one mapping between those two.
Okay. Alex Davis, our analyst here, what did you hear during your research about factors publishers considered when choosing or deploying a new codec?
Yeah, you've got a good spread here. There's a lot of different perspectives, and I think part of this sort of illustrates that there's that many moving parts. that like one decision isn't like the be all end all. So like, yes, you might have a more efficient codec, but there's, you got to think of it from source to point of consumption. So yeah, making a decision is difficult. I think it's easier for people who spend their time on working with these codecs, but I think it's notable that HEVC was sort of finalized in like 2013. It's now 10 years later, and it's still the newest codec that's being deployed, right? And I think that speaks to the latency that exists in this ecosystem, and the sort of the complicating factor of like, hey, while we need to improve the efficiency of like codecs and compression, well, at the same time, we're sort of shifting from like DSL to fiber and old cable to DOCSIS 3.1. So yeah, at the same time that these codecs are coming out, which are sort of making sales pitches on their efficiency, the likes of Comcast, right, are able to increase the sort of throughput of the networks at the same time. So yeah, there's that many moving bits to it. The best sales pitch in the world wouldn't convince everyone. So yeah, it's a lot of things to consider.
Do you want to share your predictions for codec
utilization?
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, well, so we'll give this a go. I'm going to share. I'll keep it simple, right? I'll just share this the screen. We can all see the slides. Yes. I'm not going to. Right, cool. I'm not going to try and dive into present view just in case. But this was from our Rethink TV webinar that we did, and this is the graph, right? And I can jump between the current view of the landscape and the previous view just to illustrate something. But what you're seeing here is that top line is ABC, right? And it's just under 80% in 2020, and it's coming down, right? And the key thing is back in the day, you had kind of one choice of codec, essentially. And in the coming years, you're going to have multiple choices, and they're dictated by different politics in some cases, by different device footprints in the others. But the big thing that happened, and if I jump to this slide, and I'll jump back a bit, hopefully, you can see the closeness of HEVC and AVC there, right? And really, the big thing that's changed, if I jump back to our current view, is the sort of tacit endorsal of HEVC in the sort of Google ecosystem via Chrome, and that was a fairly momentous event. And Jan, to be fair, you're the one that keyed me into this, but there's a graph, I've forgotten who it was, who I pulled from the website, but it's a night and day shift with the push for the Chrome update. And like Alex from Comcast said, the sort of installation base, it's really difficult to find good silicon these days that doesn't support HEVC. So yeah, like it can be an overnight thing. And like maybe just touching on like different views of it. This is what it looks like in a pie chart, right? But the sort of anomaly that was HEVC, which, like, to save a lot of time in the backstory, you had the politics of it with the two different pools, and the sort of, well, three in the end and now two. That shouldn't happen with VVC. We should have a smoother adoption period. So maybe in 5 years' time, when we're talking about the newest codec, it'll be VVC, and it won't be this 10-year gap. It'll be 5. And Jan, I know you wanted to ask me about patterns and things. So I might have to jump into a no. I was thought ahead. I thought ahead, Jan. Here it is. So I've zoomed in a bit. But the point here is that you can kind of see it, the sort of pattern, I think, for adoption in AV2, which is it's the green stuff up the top. But based on historical patterns, 2025 is when AV2 should be kind of finalized, and very quickly afterwards, probably the next year, that's when AV2 silicon design should start appearing. You give it another couple of years, and AV2 software decoders are fairly common, which means you can use it in browsers and phones. And then you give it another 2 years, you finish that 5-year cycle, and if history bears out again, then that should mean that AV2 hardware decoders are commonplace. So at that point in 2030 and in the next few years after that, it should be difficult to buy good silicon designs that don't support AV2 natively. And there's a lot of caveats in there, and I don't know if I need to dive down those rabbit holes now, Jan, or if we want to move back to the publishers.
No,
so
go back to your 2030 chart.
Cool. So, well, the pie charts or this one?
That one's fine. So you're looking at AV2 at still well under 10%.
Yeah.
And AV1 at 18%.
Yeah, about that. Yeah. It's
Okay.
yeah, there you go. 19%-ish. It's
Real-
it's a sort of, it should be easier to move from AV1 to AV2 as well. Like if you've decided to pursue the AO media like world, you've made a conscious decision to do so, and therefore I believe you should be more receptive to move between AV1 and AV2. Whereas like trying to jump between the MPEG and the AO media camps is like a bit more fraught.
Right. Who did you describe in general detail who you saw using AV1 besides the major players that we all know, like YouTube, Meta, and Netflix? I mean, what's the big push behind AV1 in the marketplace other than AO media members?
It's kind of like alternative use cases. I think Venom is a pretty good example of one of these sorts of users. AVC, HEVC, VVC, this MPEG like realm is like very kind of focused on a kind of like broadcast thinking, like broadcast ethos, like the best quality like content on the best possible screen in the house, and I'd prefer it if you watch this in the box office, that kind of view. Whereas the types that we see more interested in AV1 are those who are like firing up kind of new use cases, like new installations. So if your business is going to thrive on like how much you need to pay in like a multi-CDN deployment, then it becomes quite like prudent to examine like codec efficiency. And if your kind of view of AV1 is, well, it's in Chrome, and Chrome is the dominant browser, right? You're sort of more naturally inclined, I think, to go with it. So yeah, it's kind of people outside the traditional broadcast video realm, really.
Okay, let's get back into the typical broadcast realm and go back to Alex Salade. Alex, what's Codec next for you? Which are the ones that you're looking at? VVC, AV1, where do those two kind of fall out for you?
So if we're talking codecs that are not backwards compatible, that require new silicon, then definitely VVC. We spent a fairly long time trying to figure out VVC versus AV1, and weren't ever able to go and get to beyond 10% of AV1 performance over HEVC, and typically it's more or less of a wash, except for film grain. Now VVC was 40% on our tests. So same as Alex mentioned about low resolutions. Not too much gain on low resolutions, but a huge gain in 4K, and something that is enabler for 8K. So I think this is the next major codec. But then you have things that are backwards compatible, like LCVC, and this is a tool, but still like film grain.
Okay, what does HDR, or what role does HDR play in your decision-making process to choose a codec? And how does that reflect back to VVC and AV1?
So everything north of AVC is able to support HDR. So this is there is not too much difference as far as that.
Benham, what about you? You talked about AV1 HEVC. Can you get into what have you found in terms of bandwidth efficiency, encoding cost, deployability, as you talked about? Why don't you go into that a little bit more?
Sure. One thing that I should add is that for us, the video is the means to deliver our game for our customers and our users, right? And that means that ultimately we are going to choose between something like the AV1 or HEVC based on the requirements from our game designers. So if they come and say that they have to do the best HDR possible, maybe we have to use the Dolby Vision over HDR10. And then in that case, we are going to use HEVC because that's the only place that we could deliver it, right? And but regarding the savings, as discussed, HEVC, to be very brutally honest, we didn't see very meaningful bandwidth saving. And as for the AV1, we saw the savings of maximum 20 something percent on our most complex contents. Interestingly, on our not so complex contents, we didn't see much of a difference, and no meaningful difference. That doesn't mean that the AV1 or HEVC is not capable. That means that with very simple content, AVC does the job very well, especially in the low latency mode of encoding. And so yeah, the savings are going to be the bandwidth savings, and the use case will be the main drive for us. For example, if we receive a request from our game designer for the next game to be a VR 4K, requires at least 4K resolution for the VR headsets, then obviously everyone will be the winner, because we see more savings there with higher resolution. Especially, we are seeing more savings on the AV1. Otherwise, to be honest with you, AVC does the job for now in regular contents, which are well north of a couple of hundred instances. By couple of hundred, I mean 800, 900 instances of encoder are doing those not so complex videos, and AVC in near future will do the job for them. But for our most popular games, most popular streams, and which are most complex ones as well, then AV1 with like 20% of bandwidth saving would be a good choice. And the other thing is that we may not always look after we're not going after the bandwidth saving. Sometimes we are looking for better quality. We're spending a lot of money on our studios on creating those games, and we want them to look best. And you should always consider that it's not always about saving the money, because adding a new codec to what you are already delivering doesn't mean instantaneously you are going to save some money, because at the same time you should run a new encoder, you should deliver twice the bandwidth, because you cannot basically discontinue your legacy codec. The AVC will not go anywhere anytime soon, especially in the live low latency use case. So it seems that for us, the AV1 with its saving in a couple of use cases is the winner in that sense.
What's your, if you're looking at mobile, how important is hardware decode on mobile devices to your decision? Is that a factor, or as long as it plays at 30 frames per second or 60, you don't care?
Well, absolutely. I mean, for us, we are going to benefit more if users are staying more. And if we are draining the battery of mobile devices fast, then that means that the average session length for each user are going to go down, and that means losing money for us. And so in that sense, yes, of course, hardware decoding is the best case. It's the most efficient, and it reduces it reduces the battery usage a lot. I mean, you are gaining these savings by spending something somewhere that is the energy. So it's both on the encoder side and on the decoder side. So if we are deploying, for example, a software decoder on the mobile devices that makes the mobile phones glowing red hot, and then no, that won't be a good choice for us. It will reduce the average time playing by the users.
Okay. Can you take a WebRTC question? Are you familiar? Are you using WebRTC in your workflow?
We are not using, but we are familiar with. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a question. Any insight on the integration support of HEVC with WebRTC? I mean, can you use HEVC with WebRTC these days?
I am not sure about that. I know that the AV1 we can do that, but HEVC with WebRTC, I don't know about that.
Okay. Any of the panelists? Okay. Alex Zambelli, I know you're looking at both, or I know you're looking at AV1. I think you're looking at LCEVC. Why don't you talk about the pros and cons of those two codecs in as it relates to your potential use?
Sure. Yeah. Before I get into that, I do want to also just echo something that Benham just said that I think is really important. I think as an industry, we spend a lot of time talking about new codecs in terms of bandwidth savings and therefore like financial savings. And I do think we need to perhaps start, reframing some of the conversations about codecs that we have in the industry to really be more focused on the quality improvements, because the bandwidth savings, don't really translate necessarily into monetary savings for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier, because we don't have unlimited bandwidth in the world, but also because as new codecs get more efficient, our content requirements are growing at the same time, right? So we're now in this process where 4K is becoming the norm. HDR is becoming the norm. All those things require more bitrate, and so every time we get a more efficient codec, we can't ignore the fact that we're also bumping up the requirements for the video quality as well. And I think that's a good thing, right? So I think we need to look at it from a quality perspective and say we're really focusing on improving quality for consumers. We're not focusing on reducing costs necessarily. So back to your question. So looking at AV1 and LCVC, I think AV1, I think the advantage of AV1 right now is that I think it's in terms of device penetration, in terms of adoption out there on consumer devices, I think it's reaching a point where it's making it feasible for publishers to start really deploying AV1 in large numbers. So, we've seen several large manufacturers adopt and start supporting AV1 recently. And so I think 2024, I think, could be a really big year for, I think, AV1 in terms of deployments. And I think, the advantages of AV1 are, similar to any new, more efficient codec, right? So, I think, I think it is becoming very much a feasible option. With LCVC, I think the benefits of that codec are that it is an enhancement layer that works in tandem with other codecs. And so by virtue of that, it's always going to be able to be a step ahead of every codec generation. So if VVC is the latest greatest codec, then you can add LCVC on top of VVC, and so I think that's one of its big advantages. I think the other one is the backwards compatibility aspect, that you could deploy LCVC with H.264 today, and theoretically, if a device doesn't support LCVC decoding, they'll still be able to decode the H.264 baseband, if you want to call it. And so I think that's why LCVC is something that we're looking at as well.
Okay. Do you comfortable talking about the royalty situation with LCVC? I mean, they're the only publisher where you can actually pay them to use their codec, and you don't have to wait for the entire infrastructure to, on the encoding side and on the decoding side to adopt it. Is that something you've looked at, something you want to comment on?
I mean, I've looked at it, but I think it's probably premature to comment on it. I mean, generally, like when I look at deploying new codecs, I focus first on quality. I focus first on device reach. How feasible is it to deploy it, and then once all those checkboxes are checked, then I go and look at, okay, like what is it actually going to cost in terms of royalties and so on. And so oftentimes, like it's really like kind of like the step number 4, step number 5 on the list, and so it's probably still premature for me to comment on.
Okay. Alex Davies, back to you. You kind of covered this before looking at AV2, but we hear about a new codec and we think, gosh, VVC sounds great. It's 40% better than HEVC. What's the quickest a publisher out there should be considering VVC? I mean, other than installations like Alex Gelati has, where he controls the decode side and the encode side, for publishers that are publishing to the general internet, when's the earliest VVC could become relevant? I mean, let's get real here.
Yeah, so in hardware, you've got the first VVC sort of smart TVs trickling out. So as you start trying to map like shipments of flagship units into like the install base, then like you should probably start thinking about it. If you're going to sell a premium service, like if you're going to focus on like the absolute best quality, then I think it stands to reason that there should be a pretty decent overlap between like cinephiles, you know, the home theater nerds who will pay through the nose for that kind of thing. So if that's a niche that you have, then you should be thinking about it, you know, now. You probably should have been thinking about it a while ago. But if like one of an internal criteria is we will not consider a codec until it's above kind of 60-70% of our target devices, then VVC is kind of years away. But then to sort of bury your head in the sand and kind of ignore that problem is not great. I don't know if it's worth touching on like 8K there. I'm glad no one's brought it up, but like one of the big sales pitches for VVC is like 8K resolutions, but I mean there were sort of fairly tense discussions about whether we needed 4K versus like higher frame rate or better color depth and HDR and whatnot, like whether the resolution was the key thing. That's made even worse with 8K, and we're already hearing kind of like rumblings from the EU about possibly banning 8K devices for sale. So like that's not great for anyone who's trying to like sell VVC in the early days. But then as has been mentioned before, it can be applied to any bit of the video chain to get a saving. And it was something I mentioned earlier, like AVC has had like 20 years of silicon improvements to bank on. So like comparing HEVC to AVC shows like a relatively narrow gap, and I suspect that the gap will be bigger when you do comparisons of VVC to HEVC, because there's been less time dedicated to HEV and silicon. But
okay, so discuss briefly, I mean, if I'm looking at software encoders and I'm comparing AV1 to H.264, I'm thinking 50% or better savings. Is that going to be different with silicon, with real-time silicon, or should I expect the same savings?
It should be better. The bigger thing is the power consumption. So if you're gonna target mobile devices, then I think it's prudent to kind of hope and plan for the hardware availability. There's already AV1 in like MediaTek designs, which I understand is like pretty good. Qualcomm, like notably, is not doing it. I think they might have confirmed it in Gen 2. But let me interrupt for a second. I was talking on the encode side, not the decode. Oh, encode.
So
Gotcha.
do we expect software encoders to perform better than hardware encoders as it compares back to H.264, or do you think the same numbers that we've seen for software will be deliverable by hardware?
I suspect so. I believe the historical pattern will bear out that it's more efficient in like dedicated hardware. But then there's more codecs, so maybe the SoC you'd like doesn't support it, or maybe you have to pay the extra to use it. So
Okay, Alex Salade, do you have any comment on that? The efficiency of software versus hardware, at least during the initial stage of any codec deployment on the encode side?
So don't kill me as that end, but typically you get better efficiency from software encoders with very simple reason. You can go and iterate. You can go and write on Moore's law, and you can go and do things that are completely insane. If you have a dedicated ASIC, you can do better optimizations at a very low level, at the level of a block. So at least at the initial stages, software will always be ahead or get ahead.
Okay.
If I can go back to the previous question about VVC, just clarifying, the next gen codec in terms of increasing the deployment is obviously HEVC. VVC is something that, as Alex said, is probably relevant in 26, 27.
Okay. Let's take some questions. I don't think anybody's going to know this. Does anybody know if Premiere Pro will implement support for AV1 or VVC anytime soon? I don't know that one either. Not 100% sure I'm going to read this correctly, but what are the key areas that the next gen codecs, say ECM, I wonder if they're asking about EVC there, are looking at in terms of coding tools? Anybody want to So let me read that again. What are the key areas that next-gen codecs, say ECM, are looking to target in terms of coding tools? Anybody want to take that one on?
So if ECM is EVC, then it's dead. So it's not that relevant. If people mean VVC, one of the interesting things is the large block size, same as AV1. The other thing is a possibility of mixing different resolutions. So in VVC, you can have some pictures at quarter resolution, some pictures at full resolution, which lets you improve quality. There are several other things.
Okay, I don't want to pass by what you just said about EVC. Did you say EVC was dead? I mean, is that?
I think this is an unfortunate statement of opinion.
Okay. Anybody else want to? Alex Davies?
Yeah, so I think ECM is one of those the sort of AI flavored functions, right? I think it's something context model. So I mean, yeah, that next generation, like if we're talking about 10-year timeframes before like VVC is even at sort of 10-11%, you've got quite a long time until we're sort of natively doing like machine learning generated video rather than like image compression alternatives. So yeah, that's a long way off. I can't say I've really bothered reading about it because it's so far away.
Okay, it's enhanced compression model, slated to be H.267. So thank you, Praveen. Adrian Rowe is out there from Ideas. Does any of the panel, and also greening of streaming, does any of the panel have energy consumption information when playing the various codecs and how that impacts overall energy consumption? How do distribution savings compare to CPE energy usage? Anybody looking at that? Anybody want to take that on? Alex Zambelli, let me ask you, because you're a big target out there.
We haven't really started looking at yet at energy consumption. It is, I mean, we are using the public cloud for all our transcoding right now, and so our energy consumption is whatever the public cloud's energy consumption is. But yeah, we haven't taken a closer look at it. I do agree it's important. I think it's something that we definitely need to keep in mind. But I think we just haven't had the time to really take a good look at it. So sorry, I don't have a more elaborate answer.
not very politically correct here this morning.
And if I may add something, well, when you're talking about the energy consumption on playback side, I mean, it's a lot harder to actually measure that. I mean, there are so many different devices, and from desktop to mobile, and every one of them has their own hardware and software architecture. I mean, different OSs, different. Some mobile devices have, as you said, hardware decoders. Some others are just using this software decoder. So I guess it would be really hard to measure that and have a definitive answer for that question.
Okay, Alex Salade, how much are you looking at this?
Not that much. It's not really clear how much of a difference it is if you have hardware decoding for different codecs on the same SoC.
Okay. So the two more questions. Have any of you spoken to hardware manufacturers of the ICs? Basically, are they, if so, have they identified whether they'll be targeting VVC or AV1 and 2? And that leads to a bigger question. I'm hearing a lot of dissension about, and I guess this is no surprise. I mean, the difference between, is VVC, which is MPEG royalty encumbered codec, going to be codec next, or is it going to be something from the Alliance for Open Media? And I'm hearing, very dramatic and obviously differing opinions depending on which camp you're in. Is MPEG dead? Is the Alliance for Open Media going to take over, or, Alex Zambelli, let's start with you. What's your take on that? You're kind of sitting in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of an interesting spot because we don't dictate what the device manufacturers are going to support on the SoCs, especially. So we're from our perspective, we're an app developer. We develop an app on an existing app platform. We don't control how the decoding is done, and so it's really, if Samsung decides to go support a particular codec, that's probably at least like sort of three steps removed from us in terms of how much we get to dictate their adoption of new codecs. But yeah, I mean, as far as like the question about is MPEG dead? I don't think it's dead. I mean, I think there's always I think the industry just kind of moves from one center of gravity to another over time, and so I don't think MPEG is dead. I think we might just see maybe the center of gravity move a little bit and then eventually come back to MPEG. So I think it's still important that it exists, and that codec development efforts continue in both AOM and MPEG.
Alex Davies, I mean, I hear mostly from Americans in America. You obviously spoke to manufacturers around the world. What are you hearing about AOM versus MPEG? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's pretty fraught. The move from Dolby to tie up sort of VIA and MPEG LA, and then Dolby's presence in Access and Dolby's presence in Sysvel. I mean, like Dolby's pretty central to everything, and just from like an efficiency point of view, right? It doesn't make much sense to have parallel like organizations that are doing the same thing, right? But the sort of the cost of trying to unite that process and make it a bit easier is a faff. I quite like the LCEVC pitch because it just kind of bypasses that, right? It's just like, hey, you the video service, you want to use this tool, right? So that's pretty tempting, I'd imagine. And it also means you can kind of cut your distribution costs if you're a publisher without really worrying about the devices. Like if you control the application, at least you should be able to include it. So that's pretty handy. The sort of device manufacturers are in some ways a bit beholden to the silicon suppliers, like the original SoCs. And if we're talking about like really fancy video devices used in like the production side of things, you can commission an ASIC, or you can work out an FPGA like a lot more easily these days, I think, than you could way back. So if you're on like the production side of things, I think now is better. But for the manufacturers, they're sort of sticking to how they've always done things. They evaluate these codecs, and then eventually they get around to putting it in a roadmap, and then a few years later, you might find that we're at the stage that the industry kind of like use these codecs. It just takes, it's got to trickle out into the install base, and it just takes time.
Is there royalty fatigue? I mean, it's easy to say, but with H.264, there was one set of royalties, then there was ATVC, now there's VVC. So is it going to snowball until it becomes untenable, or is that just a new fact of life?
I mean, you got to throw in all the licensing costs as well, and the bilateral, and just returning to the AO Media bit. MPEG has like a historical weight to it. The AO Media stuff, if you're one of these firms that licenses your IP usually on a unilateral basis, I'm fairly sure that you reckon you could probably sue the AO Media like implementations, right? And like Sysvel has really kind of like just thrown some mud at the whole this is a royalty-free codec. Really, like, is that why Sysvel's kicking around? So yeah, like the AO Media, I mean, we've chatted about this in the past, I think, Jan, but like I suspect like it would be good for the industry if we did have that big legal showdown. But it's 2023 and AV1's been around for a while and no one's done it yet. So I'm not sure if we'll actually have that slugfest. But I mean, there'd be lawyers, I'm sure, who'd be quite gleeful about such things. But the licensing is really like quite a big piece of the pie that doesn't really get talked about much, besides the device codecs. So
okay, let me give Benham and Alex Salade a chance to respond to, Benham, where are you with AOM versus MPEG? Or do you not care? You like Alex Sambella, it's, you serve whatever platforms people want to play on.
Well, the thing is that, I mean, regarding the statement of if MPEG is dead or not, I mean, there are a couple of billion devices out there that are consuming these MPEG codecs, and they are not going anywhere anytime soon. So I don't think that realistically it would be wise choice. If you want to actually have a successful business, you shouldn't take side. I guess if there are devices out there, there are users that can actually do play those videos, I mean, you should deliver it. That's where we stand. So in our case, no, we don't take side. Whatever users can actually consume, we deliver them. Yeah.
Good. Alex Salade?
I completely agree with this. In case of AV1 versus VVC, or more precisely, in case of AOM and MPEG, we wish both sides best of luck. And now, in the key things are whether a codec delivers savings and whether a codec has sufficient reach.
Okay.
Things
One
like
comment. Go ahead. Finish up.
And then things like LCVC and additional new tools, they're interesting because they don't you don't need to wait for silicon. You basically need to wait for kernel drivers to support this, and for the ability to use multiple keys and DRM wise. That's it.
Good. One comment from Jeremy. I'm going to mangle this, but Gerdays. Yes, we've used HEVC with WebRTC. One issue we have seen is not all players work with HEVC on WebRTC, especially 10-bit. So one question came in about AI-based coding tools. Given Alex's timeline for codec adoption, what's the earliest we could see AI impacting how we encode video for distribution? Benham, have you thought about that?
Well, the thing is that if I understand the question correctly, I mean, it's talking about the extension to existing codecs. And I must say that I really, really like this approach. I mean, adding new extensions to already existing codecs. The same approach that the LCVC uses. I mean, they are just delivering the extra layer in things like these same messages. And if the player cannot use them, just discard them. It doesn't disrupt the playback. Those who can actually make use of them will use it, and we gain the savings, usually the better quality and improvement in the quality. So I'd say that be it AI tools, whatever tools, I mean, that would help make a better, create a better experience for the users, and doesn't disrupt the whole. I mean, we don't have to go and basically invest a lot in newer codecs, newer encoder, new infrastructure. If we can reuse whatever we already have and improve things for those who can actually make use of them, that would be a win for everybody, I guess. So I like this approach, but I'm not sure. I mean, we are talking about the AV2 already when the AV1 is not there yet, and who knows when, maybe in the next 2 years, it will be widespread and the use of it. But yeah, it would be a great approach if more of the people are making use of such approach. Yeah.
Okay, Alex Sambella, you got anything? I guess you got anything for us?
Yeah, I was going to mention, I mean, before we even get to the point of standardizing some of the AI-based approaches into, coding tools, I mean, I think there's a lot of room for development and just advances over the next several years in terms of pre-processing. So I think AI-driven pre-processing and also better rate control. And so I think there's a lot of things we can do to improve the image before it even reaches the compression stage. That I think, honestly, I think the next 3-4 years of codec development is going to be focused more on really getting more out of the existing codecs by the use of AI-based pre-processing than necessarily going and baking the AI based approaches into the codecs themselves.
Okay, Alex Salade, anything?
I completely agree with Alex. The first uses that we already see over the last couple of years are in the encoding. So it is pre-processing. It is also different mode decision optimizations. So this is something that exists and is very appealing. The next thing is probably also use of better upsampling, on the decoder side. And the problem with the SCI approach is that it's not enough to go and add an extra layer. You need to make sure that whatever you do with this SCI does not require access to pixels. If you need access to clean text pixels and encrypted pixels, then you're dead in the water until you have the same thing in silicon.
Okay. I'm told that we need to wrap up. So listen, I just want to thank, or go ahead, Evan, you're here.
No, go for it. Well, no, I want to thank you, Jan, and the panelists here, or as I like to call you, Jan and the Alexes. I think it's a band.
Somebody had to take that one today. I mean,
well, I was laying there waiting for me to come take it. So thank you for that great conversation about all the cutting edge codecs out there. And to remind you, we had a contest at the beginning to name the song and the band playing over the opening credits, and correctly answered up on Cripple Creek by the band was Jim Kassler, making him the winner of the $50 Amazon gift card. Somehow it will get to you, Jim. I'm not it's above my pay grade. I want to thank the panelists again, but I also want to tell you, everybody here, thanks for sticking around. Thanks, Jim, for sticking around so you could win. We'll be giving another gift card away in a half an hour at 11:30 as part of Streaming Media Connect. When I interview as a fireside chat, there is no fire, but there is a side. Quincy Alatunde, VP of Products at NBC and Peacock. Please come back for that. He's one of my favorite people in all of streaming. He's really entertaining. It'll be a great conversation about live streaming and sports and where everything is headed. We'll give away another Amazon gift card. There'll be more music, 11:30 right here. Thanks again, panelists. Thanks, VNova, for sponsoring this panel. I'll see you in a half an hour.